You died at 17 minutes to 10. Not me. That's the opening line of a book. But imagine someone just casually saying that to you over coffee. Awkward, right? That's how André Brink's Before I Forget starts. A novel that feels like the diary of an old man who just wants to tell you everything before his memory gives up on him. And trust me, he tells you everything, from reflections on love to political turmoil to a whole lot of sex. But before we talk about the book, let me tell you the story, because it's one of those stories that makes you wonder, is this deep and philosophical, or is this just one long rant from a guy who's seen too much? So we meet Chris Minnaar, an aging writer who hasn't finished a novel in years. He's looking back on his life, and the entire book is basically a letter to a woman named Rachel, who has just died. Cue sad music. Rachel was married, but she and her husband kept Chris around as a friend, like a well-loved houseplant. Or maybe like that one uncle who always tells way too many stories at family dinners. Chris reminisces about Rachel, but every time he starts on one memory, his brain goes, "Oh, that reminds me of this other time I was with a different woman." And boom, we're back in time. It's like watching someone try to explain a movie but getting distracted by every subplot.
So Rachel and I were at this party, and she looks stunning. That reminds me of the time I met this German professor, Greta. Did I tell you she slept with 13 of my colleagues? No? Oh, and then there was this South African girl who... Oh, wait. Back to Rachel.
Focus. The book moves between past and present, sometimes so smoothly that you don't even realize you've jumped decades until Chris is suddenly in the middle of another affair. And if you're wondering whether every woman in this book ends up in bed with him, well, let's just say Chris was very popular. But is the book just about sex? No. Well, mostly no. Between these passionate encounters, Chris also reflects on politics, war, and, get this, opera. Because nothing screams deep philosophical reflection like comparing George Bush's invasion of Iraq to some twisted version of male dominance.
Iraq may well be Bush's big wet dream, his passage into his own warped notion of manhood. It is sickening to behold. Page 121.
Oof. Tell us how you really feel, Chris. So what is this book, and why does it feel like we just sat through an old man's personal confession? This is Before I Forget by André Brink, a South African author who's been shortlisted for the Booker Prize twice. And let me tell you, the man can write. Even when Chris is rambling, Brink's prose is so smooth, so poetic, that you can't help but be pulled in. Is it sexist? Maybe. Maybe not. Chris isn't just a womanizer. He does have moments where he respects and even admires women.
I was up in arms with her, against the world of men deranged by testosterone. I wanted to protect her. I had to protect her. And for once, the very fact that she was beautiful and vulnerable ensured that I would never dream of taking advantage of her.
Page 142. But the book definitely has a theme. And that theme is, well, Chris getting lucky. A lot. But beyond all the romance and reminiscing, there's something kind of sad about this story. Chris is writing all this down because he's afraid of forgetting. Just like his mother, who, at 102, can't hold a conversation without drifting into fragments of the past. This is what she said to Chris during one of his visits to her at her old age home.
Nobody said a word about his philandering. They all looked up to him, envied him. But if I dare to go out with a man on a Saturday night, even if it is for a meal or a film, all the fingers point at me.
Page 280. And this was after the death of her husband. It makes you wonder, how much of our past do we hold on to? And how much of it do we let define us? So, would I recommend it? If you love poetic, reflective writing, South African history, and don't mind a book that feels like an old man oversharing at a bar, then yes. But if you're not into books with a heavy dose of passion, maybe skip this one. I personally enjoyed Praying Mantis more, but hey, Before I Forget still gives a lot to think about. What do you think? Would you read this? Let me know in the comments. And if you like book discussions with a little humor thrown in, hit that like button and subscribe for more. And as always, link to get a copy of this book is in the description. See you next time, Before I Forget.